Hey everyone, Nick from Headliner here, bringing you another episode of the Headliner Podcast. So in our newsletter last week, we asked you guys to submit some audio or video telling us the one thing you wish you knew before you'd started your podcast. I was actually a bit surprised by the answers we got to this question because as a person with my own personal podcast, I kind of expected the answers to skew in a completely different direction from what we got. But before you guys get to hear some of those cool answers I'm talking about, I thought I'd throw things over to Oliver from the Headliner team. You see, Oliver has a tip he'd like to share with you to help you guys get the most out of using Headliner. He also has a few updates for you guys on some of the cool things you can do on our site. And after that, you guys will get to hear from a couple of Headliner users about the number one thing they wish they knew before they started their podcast.
Hey everyone, it's Oliver from Headliner here. Thanks for tuning in this week. So, a couple of things I'm going to go over in this week's episode. One is a tip for how to get the most out of your videos. And then I'm just going to talk about some of our product updates. So the first tip is something we actually talk about a lot, and that's make sure you use captions if at all possible when making your videos. The stat that had been thrown around for years was that 85% of videos on Facebook were watched with the sound off. And there's actually a study that Verizon Media and Publicis did last year that has some other interesting stuff too. And I'm just going to read you some stats from that story. So 80% of respondents say they are more likely to watch an entire video when captions are available. So if you want to, get people from the very beginning to the end of your video, you might want to include captions. Another kind of interesting fact is that 80% of people who use captions aren't deaf or hard of hearing. So most of the actual population out there, regardless of hearing ability, is going to get benefit and use captions. 37% of video viewers report captioning encourages them to turn sound on because it made them more interested in the video. So think about that. If you're trying to stand out on social media, you need to do everything you can to keep people engaged and a little more interested. So every little bit helps. Another really interesting fact, 92% view videos with the sound off on mobile. If you think about how mobile is taking over the world in terms of internet traffic, and it actually has already, and 92% of people viewing video on there with the sound off, you'd be pretty wise to have captions on there. So that's our main tip is to use captions when on your videos. In terms of product updates, a couple things and some updates, some things that have been out for a few weeks now. One thing for Headliner automation, you can now go in and edit your automations. So instead of having to set up a whole new one, you can actually just go into any existing automation and adjust it as you see fit. Another thing I want to mention for automation is that you can actually choose the clip that you want for your automation. It just has to happen after the video has been created. So once you get your video, you click into it, and then you'll have an option there to reclip it. Click that, and you actually will be brought to this pretty cool page we made where it shows all the clips we found in your episode laid out in chronological order. You just pick the one you want, and it'll update the video accordingly. Another thing I want to mention is that, yes, automation does have captioning available. Just make sure to turn that on when you're setting up your automation. Thanks for listening. This is the end of my segment on the show. Just want to remind everyone, if you haven't, please subscribe to our newsletter, headliner.app/newsletter. That's headliner.app/newsletter. Thanks and have a great week.
My name is James Sabata. My podcast is thenecronama.com, a weekly podcast where we analyze horror films as social commentary. The number one thing I wish I had known before I started podcasting was that practice makes perfect. Your first show isn't going to be fantastic. Your 100th show isn't going to be the best one you ever do. Every episode you learn something new and you incorporate it and you keep building a better show. And I wish I had known that when I started because I was very neurotic about editing and trying to take out every breath, and I didn't need to be. And I feel like I took a lot of the fun out in the beginning. Now we're almost 40 episodes in, we're having a great time, our guests are having a great time, and our listeners are having a fantastic time. And we only keep getting better. So my advice to anybody starting out is just enjoy the process. At the end of the day, we're here to have a good time with this. When you're enjoying creating your show, everyone else will enjoy listening to it.
Hi, I'm Kitty Feldy, and I'm the writer-producer of the Fina Mendoza Mysteries podcast. It's an audio drama for little girls and political junkies. And the one thing I wish I had known when I started podcasting Fina was the airplane schedule for flights taking off from LAX. I mean, I never noticed it when I was just living here, but when I was outside with the microphone trying to tape scenes, we had to stop about 20 or 30 times to let the planes go overhead. So next time, I'm going to call LAX.
My name is Emily Harmon, and my podcast is the Onward Podcast. Here's the number one thing I wished I had known when I started podcasting. That every podcaster feels a little nervous and scared and maybe sometimes insecure. Just do it and you'll have so much fun.
My name's Hannah and my podcast is the Psyche Podcast. Here's the number one thing I wish I had known when I started podcasting, and that is just how much fun it is and how amazing it is to connect with people all around the world who come on as guests on the podcast, and just how enjoyable it is. I was really reluctant to start because I thought, there's so many podcasts out there, and what am I going to add to the space, and how do I even start, and how am I going to get listeners, and all these worries. And then I just dived in and started, and it has been so fun.
My name is Philip Wilkerson, and my podcast is called Positive Filter. I wish I would have known to be consistent and plan out at least 10 episodes at a time rather than one by one. It's very hard with very busy lives to get people on your show or to plan out your show. So if I scheduled out at least 10 episodes, it gave me a little bit of wiggle room to work with my podcast to edit. But because if I was going episode per episode, I was feeling rushed all the time.
My name is Scott Weidenkivowitz, and my podcast is the WordPress Photography Podcast. Here's the number one thing I wish I had known when I started podcasting. I wish I knew about Headliner from the beginning. You see, I was doing the same thing that Headliner does, but I was doing it manually. And I was doing it in Final Cut Pro and taking so much time, and it was just a lot of work. And the fact that Headliner can do this for me saves me a boatload of time.
My name is Colby Costello, and I host several podcasts. The 3 podcasts that I host are Sports as a Job, Book Club, the Build Up Podcast, and the Student Spotlight. Well, that's actually 4. The one thing I wish I knew before getting into podcasting was how rewarding it would be. I think if I understood how much of an impact I could have, how many people would actually be following what I put out, I would have definitely not hesitated and got into it right away.
My name is Matt Pollard, and my podcast is Holding the High Line with Rabbi and Red. Here's the number one thing I wish I had known when I started podcasting. Audio quality and post-recording editing are very critical. It took me almost 2 years to self-teach myself and figure out how to edit sound quality after it had been recorded, but before I was ready to post it to my podcatcher. I've learned little tricks on how to edit out background noise and splice together bits of audio for continuity when something needed to be cut out, and how to level out the audio from different co-hosts at a very high level. Spend some time selecting and learning the ins and outs of the editing software that you use for post-production. It'll go a long way early on and in the long term.
Hi, my name's Juan Kingsbury, and my podcast is the Career Blind Spot Podcast. And the one thing that I wish I had known when I started podcasting was what kind of podcast do I actually want, specifically setup, I should say. I was a big fan of podcasts. I was a big fan of Kevin Pollak's chat show. It was actually a friend. His was a video, which sounded great in theory, but then I realized there's all these extra factors. Versus doing a solo podcast where my Blue Yeti mic might have been just fine. Just, pick one lane, try it, see what works. Don't regret anything, but that's what I wish is, pick a setup, pick an environment that you're likely to use again and again.
Hello, my name is Jungle Jusubjan, and my podcast is called Chai Latte and Salt, Untold Stories of Central Asia and Beyond. Before starting this podcast, I wish I knew how complicated it is to have a podcast in a language which is not your first language, which is English. So things are going on. I wish you good luck and stay safe and goodbye.
The general consensus we got from your answers is that podcasting is a really fun and satisfying thing to do. Whether it's podcasting as a hobby or as an extension to your business, people are really enthusiastic about recording and releasing episodes of a show, which rings true to me. Podcasting is a lot of fun, and I think a large part of the appeal of it is the communal attitude that a lot of podcasters take up. I was personally expecting more people to talk about how they wish they knew how to record remotely and stuff of that sort before getting their podcast started, but I'm genuinely thrilled to have been proven wrong there. There's just something really nice and wholesome about people saying that they wish they knew their podcast would be this fun to work on before they had started it. At the end of the day, it's nice for a podcast to find an audience and really engage with the community, but if the people making the show aren't enjoying it, it kind of detracts from that. That's not to say that that stuff isn't important. It definitely is, but I guess I was just kind of touched by the fact that it's a bit less important than we're led to believe it is. But that just about wraps up this week's Headliner podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, or that you at least learned a thing or two from it. If you want to submit to a future episode of the podcast, or just learn a bit more about what we're up to on a weekly basis, you could do so by visiting headliner.app/newsletter. And once again, I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and until next time, have a good one.